looking at the economy over the last 18 months, there's a huge stimulus package that came through that did fund a great deal of job creation. There was an extension of COBRA. There was a COBRA subsidy for unemployed workers that offered where the federal government paid 65% of the insurance costs for recently terminated employees. And then there's giant expenses for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Against those outflows, we see a growing tide for kind of a hawkish approach to the federal budget deficit. So the question for the candidates here is, how do we balance the competing interests and how do we manage the economy as far as outflows, and where do we get the revenue from to balance the budget? And I believe this is the fifth question. So who started the last one? So I think we're to Congressman Farr. You'll begin 90 seconds.
And what you kind of wondered for the question.
Thank you. I've practiced very well. The question is, what do we do about the economy? How do we balance competing interests, and then what are the priorities in the short term? I would say in the next 3 years for the economy in this country.
Well, first of all, I don't believe with what Mary said. I know it was very popular to get just government off your back. Everybody in this room has a license. We just get government out of the licensing process. We don't license banks. We don't license lawyers. We don't license doctors. We don't license businesses. And we've actually got a government that can do that for you. It's called Afghanistan. And I think that's not what the people in Afghanistan want, is a government that can't be governing. I look at it as government as a partnership. And whatever that partnership works well for both sides, extremely well. And the partnership now there's some uneven parts to it. We're still allowing large tax bases for corporations to go offshore and hire foreign nationals to do the work of the products that are and the personnel that are here in the United States. We should stop those tax rates, stop the leaks. We need to make private sector, allow private sector to grow again. Banks are sitting on an awful lot of money in this community that could be invested in this community right now. It's very hard to get access to capital. It's there. We ought to be able to see if we can get that capital out in the street. We certainly are going to have to cut the Defense Department. It's grown 55% over the last few years. Those cuts, if they're severe enough, may affect this community. We bring in $1 billion of defense money to this community. If we cut that big, that's going to be a big impact. That's just in Monterey County. So, you have to be smart about this. And I think that what I'm trying to do is cut, squeeze, and trim where it's smart, close tax loopholes where it's appropriate, and grow the economy.
Mr. Taylor, to you, 90 seconds about the economy.
Could I get a clarification? This is referring to the same question as to what's the importance of balancing the federal budget in order we can start cutting costs?
Correct.
Okay.
And
okay.
Cutting costs and raising revenue, I guess,
yes.
Or the alternative.
Okay. This is extremely important. Budgetary funds, operating capital, and tax revenue, whichever terminology you want to use, are no different than the natural resources like water, oil, lumber, etc., that we Americans take from our surroundings. They're part of our ecosystem, and we as a society have determined that our ecosystem should be treated with respect. Why would we choose to respect our physical environment and totally disrespect our fiscal environment? Why do we tolerate waste, fraud, duplication, inefficiency, and excess in the handling of our fiscal resources and prosecute those who abuse our physical resources in our environment? Over half the federal tax dollar collected today goes towards the payment of the interest of the national debt. It's up to $600 billion a year. No moderately intelligent American would run his or her personal finances with that level of debt. Yet we tolerate this kind of fiscal irresponsibility from our government. It's totally unacceptable and even dangerous. Americans need to put fiscal responsible leaders back in charge of the budgetary process. Leadership is tough, and if people holding leadership positions today are incapable, as many of them obviously are, of making the tough choices and decision, necessary to operate our nation within our means, they need to be discarded. America doesn't have a revenue problem, it has a spending problem. Admiral Mike Mullen, chairman of the Chief Joyce's staff, had quoted, "America's national debt is the biggest strategic threat. It has reached a level that limits America's ability to adequately defend itself, and we are facing a fiscal crisis, and we need people in office who recognize and are willing to address this problem."
While I appreciate everyone's enthusiasm, here's an illustration. If there's clapping and you're interrupting the candidate, you're actually taking away from his time. So if we can wait until the end, that'd be appropriate, please. Mary, it's you.
Okay. I think that everyone in the country probably agrees that we would love to have a partnership with government. Oh, sorry. We would, I think we'd all like to have a partnership with our government and our leaders. That is not in question. I'm not an anarchist. However, what we don't have is a partnership. We have basically a tyrant, if you want to compare the government, and it's not listening to the people. It's doing what it wants, it's not listening. That's not a partnership. So that sounds good, but I have to disagree there. To balance the budget, there's a number of things we can do. And the first thing we have to do is, and it's important that we do this, we have to cut spending, and we can. Even the UK, which is basically a socialist government, is cutting 25% across the board on all of their government departments. 25%. We could certainly do 10%, and in some cases, much more. We could bring the troops home. I believe that we should do that anyway. Think about the money that would save. We can put them to work, building the infrastructure, the crumbling bridges and highways that have to be rebuilt. None of the states have the money to do this. Take the TARP money, take the money that we're spending overseas, bring the soldiers back, put them to work. This has to be done. We cannot just let our country and our economy crumble. So get rid of the healthcare bill. Again, huge savings there. Cut across the board. We're going to have to control the unions. They are running rampant. These giant pensions that union people and government employees are bringing home are going to bankrupt us. It's not fair that the private sector is scraping by and government employees are making sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars after they retire.
I hope that applause was really for me. How important is it to balance the federal budget? Very important. Where would I start cutting costs? Number one, our military budget. We spend more on our military budget than the next 10 countries combined. We don't need 25 or 50,000 troops, plus families, plus other support personnel in Germany. We don't need the Afghan war. We've talked about that a lot. I subscribe to the Green New Deal. One of the provisions is to cut military spending 70%. That will definitely balance the budget and leave more money left for other things. We need to get out of Korea. Also, according to the Internal Revenue Service, tax collections in the last fiscal year are down $400 billion. And if anybody is familiar with the Internal Revenue Service, as Sam should be, that's not all the economy.